All right, welcome everybody to your August edition of the highly talented award-winning Don't Get
Award-winning.
Rusty. A couple of smiley faces. We'll show you the award someday if I can find it. Okay, so this month, getting the most out of your pilot certificate, rated for adventure. So this is going to be very interesting. We're going to talk about a whole plethora of things with a wonderful guest that you can see that I'm going to keep silent for now. As always, we're generously brought to you by the beautiful company Boeing. You got Jeppesen, ForeFlight, and Boeing. So thank you for them, to them, for this wonderful episode. And after that, I should actually have this up too. We'll go through the housekeeping as we often do. And this is important because asking questions, if we give away gifts, we're not this time, so sorry. But there's things here that you have to know in order to get through this webinar. One is on the right side. That is what it looks like now. If you want to ask a question, you'll notice the red arrow. Chris, if you could point that out for us there. And that is where you ask, and then it'll pop up on our admin panel there. Lastly, you'll see the bottom two. This is if you're on a tablet. It is different. There's a question mark and a send. It doesn't happen until you actually hit the send button. So that's very simple. And then we just kind of take you as they come. If it's related to what we're talking about, I'll get that on the air, if you will. If not, we'll save it for Q&A and I'll let you know that as well. So if you can hang out for that, usually at the hour point. All right, next. Couple intros. Me, I'm Pablo Maurelia, Senior Director of Flight Training Technology. All things AFTA, technology, and anything else that, I don't know, make you laugh, hopefully. Pilot, tech guy, animal lover, hockey player, and so on. I'm going to pass over to Chris Moser. Chris.
Hey, I'm Chris Moser. And I work at AOPA as well, Senior Director of Flight Training Education. And I'm a CFI, play music, do other stuff, ride my bike, want to do that later. And check out the stuff we do for flight schools and CFIs. Back to you, Pablo.
Oh, thanks, Chris. Steven, say hello, Steven.
Hello, Steven. Working in the background, keeping things coordinated, trying to keep these guys on track. It's a work in progress.
And lastly, I got to tell you, and I've told Tom, be ready for it because he knows it. I love this man. Okay, he's fantastic. He's got a collared shirt for us today, so that's special. I didn't expect it today, but that's special for me. I know he did it for us. Tom, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. Tom Haines, 34 years at AOPA until April when I retired, but most recently Senior VP of AOPA Media Outreach and Communications, and Bonanza owner, hiker, biker, and camper, and some ratings, and like I said, Bonanza owner, and been kicking around AOPA for a long time.
And probably busier now than you ever have been.
It kind of working out that way, yeah. It's right nuts.
Welcome, Tom. Thank you. So, as I always tell, it's a quick one. He's the first guy that said hi to me, and I was starstruck. My first day at work, I was standing outside.
I said hi to you first.
No, you didn't. I didn't even know you yet. I didn't even like you yet, technically. But yeah, you came up to me during the Frederick Air Race, the women's air. It was fantastic. I was like, okay, next slide.
All right,
guys, reminders as always. It'll take a few minutes for this one, but wings credit, the #1 highly asked question. Yes, you get wings credit as long as you are watching and you're registered with the same email. Okay, if you came on with a separate email, you will not get wings credit. But if that happened, don't sign off. You can stay on. Just put it in the Q&A, and Stephen will take care of that for us. But that's the way it goes. It is being recorded. The second most asked question. We are recorded. It will hit the airwaves on YouTube and the aopa.org/webinars in about 24 hours or so. Call it 48 to be safe, but it will hit then. You can rewatch it then. YouTube as well. You can find us at AOPA Live. That is where we're under the playlists. So that's the channel we're on.
Additionally, three or four times, right, Pablo?
That at least, and wait 30 seconds because it doesn't count until then. Okay, remember, vote often as we do in Chicago, although I'm in Colorado now. Stephen, lastly, this is a new one for everybody, so I know we'll get to it real quick, we are also on, is it Facebook and YouTube Live? Is that right today?
Facebook, we know, is working for sure. YouTube, we're trying to make sure it's actually all connected properly, but ostensibly, yes.
Okay, fantastic. Look at us moving forward in technology. Okay, Chris, next slide.
All right.
So let us begin. Did we mention, and we like to do this just because aviation is wonderful and there's a lot of things that we don't know about. In this case, look at that, August 18th, 1929, the first Women's National Air Derby. Next slide, let's see what they did. You can look it up yourselves for more information so we don't take up more time. That is the route. Look at that, starting in Santa Monica.
That's real cross country right there. I mean, come on.
That's right.
Long trip.
Yeah, that's a solid cross country with that left turn in Fort Worth. I don't know why that, but that's awesome. Okay, next slide. And let's start with the poll, as we often do. Okay, which pilot certificate has the fewest number of holders? Let's hit that quickly. When we get to 75%, as always, we'll start and we'll get Tom talking. He's not getting paid to sit there and watch, right? Tom?
That's right.
Wait a minute, is he getting paid?
Yeah. Okay.
Except in admiration for Pablo?
You're retired, Tom. You don't get paid anymore.
Your admiration is pay enough for me, Pablo.
That's right. It is. It's our eternal admiration.
And this is another moment I shall never forget. All right, so the numbers are getting up there. There you go, 54, 55. We're getting up there. Hurry up, people. Get in there so we can get talking here.
What do you think, guys? What's the answer going to be? Fewest number of certificate holders, and it means that they do need to require a certificate.
Oh, look at Chris. Look at Chris. Okay, balloon chair, skip lane, recreational, sport, or CFI. All right, we're at 74. One more vote, and all right, that's it. 75%. What do we got? What are the numbers?
Let's see it. Look at that, the balloon chair, number one.
Who knew?
Yeah, so let's describe that one real quick. So balloon chair is not a certificate. So unfortunately, 47% of you are wrong. Trick question. We got you. We got you. The ski plane, or skip lane, as it's spelled in the FAA handbooks, is also not a certificate. So gosh, we've knocked out almost 75% of the answers right there.
This is actually new for us. This is new, yeah. So correct answer?
Recreational. That's correct. And Chris, how many were there?
Yeah, I looked it up yesterday. So as of 2021, the most recent data, there are 85 recreational pilot certificates. So if you become a rec pilot, if you don't already have one, you can become part of the elite as it comes to pilots. So just saying. All right.
All right, fantastic. Let's begin. And Chris, one of the first hellos is from Myron Moser. So I think they're related to. They said hello. Hey. Let's keep moving on. All right. Myron? What are we covering today, Chris?
So what we're going to do is, with Tom's help, because he has a wealth of experience in a lot of this kind of crazy flying, we're going to talk first just about initial pilot certificate options, just as a base. But then we're going to talk about some options that at least we have experience with. We know we're not necessarily going to cover them all, but we're going to talk about gliders, instrument rating, fun add-ons that you might be able to do or want to do, landing on H2O, instructing, GA travel, and charitable flying. So lots of different options, and at least one of us has done each of these things, which is why we chose these. So that way we can talk about that and explain maybe why you should do it. So first, get your pilot certificate. So what are the basics here? It's like you've got 3 options for your initial pilot certificate in whatever category you might want to fly. So we're assuming that a lot of you folks out there already have pilot certificates, so you know this, but just in case for our students that are out there, you've got either your sport, rec, or private. Most people are probably going to go for their private. That is no limitation on distance or aircraft, within limits. I mean, you can't fly whatever, but for the most part. Then you have the sport pilot certificate. Jumping down to the bottom real quick, there are some limits on the size of the aircraft and on the operations, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But you can fly wherever you want cross country. And then the other one is the recreational, which, as we said, is the elite of your initial pilot certificates, because not very many people have these. In fact, Tom said you actually knew somebody that actually had one on staff.
Yep, that's amazing.
Which, because I actually don't know that I've met Mocktail, so I don't know of anyone else that I know personally that had one. But fewer hours, and that's something I'll talk about in a little bit, and limitations. There are some limitations on the distance in aircraft. So that's the basics. Not a lot of stories here, but we just want to give it that base. Let's jump to the next one. So flying light sport, a pretty good option. So Tom, feel free to tell. I know that you owned a light sport aircraft, an RV-12 for a while. Did you fly it much when you had it, or?
Yeah, I did fly it some. I had it on leaseback with a local flight school, because they're at Frederick, where well, you and I are based at least. There are a couple of flight schools, and none of them had a light sport aircraft available to do sport pilot training. And I knew some people who wanted to get a sport pilot certificate and had no options in Frederick. So anyhow, I ended up buying a light sport airplane, put it on lease back with the flight school, and I also flew it some myself, RB-12. And I got to tell you, it's an SLSA, because in order to be used for commercial operations, it has to be a factory-built light sport airplane. Can't be a kit-built one. But anyhow, so it's an SLSA, meaning it was built in the factory, special light sport. And mine was an RB-12 with a Rotax engine, and it was super fun to fly. Yep. And unbelievably economical compared to my Bonanza, at least. I think, as I told you guys, when I fueled it up, it was like there was a digit missing. It was, it'd be like, $50 for fuel, and normally in the Bonanza, you can't even turn the pump on for less than $150. So
that's what you spend just on taxiing that Bonanza.
Kind of. Anyhow, so it is really a lot of fun. The airplanes are really sporty, thus the name, I guess, and easy to fly, and just and super capable too.
So Tom, in terms of economical, also, just real quick, what are you burning per hour on that?
And the RB-12 with a Rotax engine, in a flight school or kind of a training environment, it's like maybe 3 gallons an hour, 3.5. Cruising is like 4. If you're really pushing it, it's 4.5. And you can put
MoGas in it.
You can put MoGas in it too. And even the Rotax, within some limits, is even ethanol. MoGas with ethanol in it can be used, although it would prefer not to have that.
Yeah.
But anyhow, it all works. It's a lot of fun.
And really quick, it prefers the unleaded MoGas, so it's actually the preferred stuff for the Rotax. So
right, yeah.
Before we get out of this one though, that second bullet I think is probably the most important one. There is you can actually use it for higher certificated pilots as well. So
that's right.
Hypothetically, could I get my private in an LSA or SLA?
Yep, totally can. And the other part we wanted to mention here too is you can do your private, but if you already have your private or commercial, whatever, you have another pilot, and that's why I put higher certificated pilot. All I meant was that it's like there's other ones that require more training or whatever. But if you already hold a pilot certificate, you can exercise sport privileges, and this is often done by folks that maybe they're having trouble with the medical. So let me put the caveat in here: as long as you have not been had your medical denied, revoked, or suspended, as long as that has not happened, then you are able to use your driver's license as a medical for flying sport. So kind of a cool deal. Economical. It's an option too for folks that may want to do that instead as well. Big thing is it is smaller aircraft. They are sporty. I admit, I've flown the RB-12. It is fun. Super light. It rolls really fast. It's got big, the flap-arounds on it. Very cool airplane. But the big thing is currently they are limited to 1,320 pounds for the land-based ones at least. A little heavier for the ones that fly on sea, and you do have some limitations. It's just one other passenger or just one passenger with you, and then there's limitations on altitude and where you can go depending on your training.
Which is a great transition, Chris. It says, if you're reading my mind, are there any LSAs that are certified IMC? Which is a question asked by a certain viewer. Wonderful question.
Man, that's a good one. I have to look that one up. Do you know, Tom, off the top of your head? I don't think so. No. I don't think you're not allowed to operate. Yeah.
You can do instrument training in one, but you can't fly it in IMC. So, I mean, from an economic standpoint, once again, less expensive to operate than, say, a 172 if that's what you want to get your instrument rating. So you can do the training in it, and you can maybe even take the check ride in it, but you can't fly it in IMC, unfortunately.
You can, though. A lot of times there's a limitation on night flying for sport pilots, but you can get a thing on that. You can get them like approved or whatever, equipped for night flying. So you can get that too.
Right. So we're pretty close to this one. So just the last one here, and someone asked a really good question too for maybe people that just aren't pilots or just students right now, is can you get your rec if you already have your private? So that's a good distinction we should make here, which is you don't need to.
There's there's a ranking here. So it goes from and I put this ranking only, I guess it's based on hours, honestly. Yeah. Because the private has, out of the three, the private has the most privileges. And honestly, the sport then sport and rec are almost even. They've got differences, right? So you've got the private has the most privileges. So if you hold that, that supersedes the other two. But if you get your sport, you can move up to the private, or if you have your rec, you can move up to the private as well. And in both cases, you can also just get additional training that will allow you to expand those privileges as well. But yeah, you wouldn't typically go sport to rec. I think that somebody was a rec, they would just go to private if they were going to change. But if you're a rec, you can exercise sport privileges, so that does work that way. There's all weird stuff in there. So anyway, all right. I think barring any of the questions, the big thing we want to do is on each of these, when it's appropriate, we did want to mention, you'll see here I've got 17 years old, asterisk. That's because if you're flying sport as a glider pilot, that's 16 instead to hold the certificate. And when I put English, it doesn't mean you have to be from England. All I meant was English proficient. I was trying to keep it short. And then you do need either a medical or use your driver's license as a medical certificate. Again, as long as you've not been suspended, revoked, or what did I say? Suspended, revoked, or I forgot the other one right now already. But written test, you do have to take the written test for it and a check ride. So pretty straightforward, just like most of these are going to be. Now, this is one that it's like, I know that when I became an instructor, the rec pilot certificate, this is one that I remember when I first became an instructor, and I was like, man, gosh, there's all these limitations and rules. And they're like, don't worry about it. Everybody wants to do a private anyway. And I've come around on that and said, not necessarily. I think that even though there's only 85 of them currently, you can be elite, that I think this is a good option for some folks, because the main thing is here is it has limitations that are similar to the sport. You can fly heavier airplanes, like a 172, you can't fly as a sport. But the cool thing about the rec is basically you get to solo and you're pretty much done. You don't need to do any instrument training for this one. There's no nighttime training. There's no cross-country training. There's a little bit of cross-country, very minimal. So you can do this one. It's like the sport you're supposed to be able to do in 20 hours, although I think most people can't do that. I've been told by someone who runs a sports school, actually the biggest light sports school in the United States, told me that it's hard to get the sport in 20 hours. It's very difficult, and they do this all the time. But she did tell me that the rec pilot, you can do that in 30 hours because it's 30 hours minimum, and that is possible. And I believe it because basically you solo, and it's not much after that. So that's why
Chris, I think
is a good option for those.
Well, the other thing too is we mentioned it just in passing in our pregame here was also there's people that drop out of private pilot training.
Yep.
You know, they drop out with all of the needed requirements to get their rec.
Yes.
Get the rec. I mean, you put that much training into it, and for whatever reason, whether loss of job, right, money, pandemic caused a lot of things nowadays. But if instead of just dropping out, just get the rec if you're already there, and you could still work towards the rest of it.
So yeah, for those out there that may have soloed and then for some reason you slowed down or stopped, or you're thinking about stopping, just go take the rec written test. You take the rec written test, you take a check ride. Now you have a pilot certificate. And now later you can either exercise the privileges of that, or you could, and it never expires. You can always come back and get your private and add that stuff on later, or you can add on. Plus there's training even with your rec certificate with the CFI, you can expand your cross country and all this other stuff. So it's great. By the way, 17 years old for that one, same thing. You can see the requirements right there, pretty much like the other ones. So, all right, I'm done with that spiel. Hey, who put this one in here?
I don't know. Can you tell us?
I can't imagine.
This is the Chris Moser segment. Please finish it off. Let's get to it. I want to hear Tom talk, for the love of God.
Yes.
Go.
Well, Tom's probably flown gliders too. Anyway, I want to say that if you have not flown a glider, please go try it. It is awesome. They're really cool. I started.
Tell them Chris sent you.
Yeah, no, exactly. Use the hashtag Chris Soren Chris. But so gliders are really cool. It will teach you to be a better pilot. Whether you start in gliders and then go to be a powered pilot, that's a very easy transition because it's like they already know everything about flying except for running the engine. Or if you're a powered pilot and then want to become a glider pilot, that helped me a lot too. I started in gliders, but I then went and did my powered and came back. And coming back into gliders, it took me, I think it was 4 days. I went down and I did my commercial out on 4 days for doing the glider. It was cool. You will learn a lot. They're just fun. Plus there's motor gliders. There's no medical required, even suspended, revoked, and all the other stuff. You can still fly gliders like a balloon too, which we didn't necessarily talk about here. But any experience flying gliders you ever done it, Tom, for a story or something, or?
Not for a story. I have flown a motor glider once. Is my only experience in gliders, and it was super fun. I mean, and what a neat way to do it, because obviously you don't need a tow crew, tow plane, all that sort of thing. You can launch yourself, get up to altitude, shut the engine down. In this case, it was one of those really neat ones that where the propeller, folds into the nose and the nose collapses back. And then later, you're gliding down, you're getting kind of low. It's like, oh, just start the motor back up again, engine back up again, and climb back up and do it all over again. So you can stay up for really long periods of time. And
they're cool. And that's the cool thing. They can fly them. I know out here, just where you're in Frederick, they use the mountains, and they will do ridge soaring from here down to Tennessee and back. So very, very cool. So anyway, check out gliders. You trust me.
Hey, the other cool thing about gliders is that you have 16 here, and maybe that's to get a pilot certificate, but you can solo a glider at 14.
Exactly.
And so there are a lot of kids that I've run into over the years who really want to get going in aviation, but they're like 12 and 13 years old, but they're very excited, and they see that 16 to solo a powered airplane seems like forever. But they can start glider flying right away, and by the time they turn 14, they can be ready to solo a glider. And so that's a great way to get engaged in aviation even sooner for relatively low cost too.
And I know that's exactly the point too. It's like I've known kids that have done that, and it is very cheap. I want to say that I think I did my entire commercial add-on, and it was, I don't know, I think I paid $2,000 or something like that for all of that. And it was a lot of flying. So really cost effective. It is fun, and the motor glider thing is cool. And by the way, just the last side note on this is up at Oshkosh, I know Pablo and I both saw it, the jet powered glider, you can fly a turbine glider. So I think that's pretty sure that's experimental.
All right, enough on gliders. Let's get to the stuff with power.
Here we go.
All right.
So Tom, I know one thing we wanted to talk about was the instrument rating, and I know that you've done tons of travel in your Bonanza, and we can hit these other points, but you want to tell us a little bit about how you've used your instrument rating just in all the travel that you've done in your Bonanza?
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about instrument rating is that it really opens up the skies to you on so many days when the weather for if you're just a VFR, you can't go. And it's often not because the weather is terrible. It's just because it's not quite good enough for VFR flight. Maybe there's a, kind of a low overcast you just need to punch through, or on landing, same thing. It's like, the broken clouds, and, you technically can't go through there, but with an instrument rating, you can, come down through the clouds. You can fly maybe an approach and that sort of thing. So it really opens up the doors. And I always say that the instrument rating is sort of your license to avoid bad weather, because you can fly on days when there may be bad weather around, but the goal is always to try to avoid it. But you can still be out there flying around, where if you're a VFR only pilot, you'll even get that opportunity. I've got an instrument rating for 30 some years, and I don't fly in the clouds that much, because you're out there flying in the system, and you're looking for ways to avoid the weather. And some days you get some cirrus clouds or something like that, or some stratus clouds. I mean, that you kind of drone along in, where they're typically pretty smooth and that sort of thing, as opposed to cumulus clouds. But so you might log some instrument time, but lots of other days you're flying IFR and really not logging a lot of IMC time, because you're doing your best to avoid the weather itself. So it's really helpful and opens up a lot of opportunities for you for flying.
And I'd agree with the experience that you had as well, because I know I was just talking to somebody just before this, a little bit earlier this morning, and how the vast majority of the time that I did instruments when I was especially flying professionally, it was just going through a layer and then getting up on top, usually VFR over the clouds, in VMC at least, and then back down through it for the approach. So really, really good. It will make ATC, it takes all the fear out of that, because by the time you've done your instruments, ATC will not scare you anymore. So if that's ever something that bothered you, that's great. And of course, we put this asterisk on clouds won't stop you. You've done a lot, and I've done a lot too. But one thing we wanted to talk about here too is that, and we'll see, we get your take on this, Tom, is that minimums. Should you have minimums, even though they're not required for a GA pilot flying on instruments? What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Personal minimum. Of course, there are minimums for approaches, so we do have those. But personal minimums, yeah, absolutely. I mean, once you get your certificate, you'll probably be more proficient at flying an instrument procedure than you may ever be in the rest of your career. However, you don't always have that sort of weather knowledge and the experience of flying in the system yet. And that's where you need to sort of have a building block approach to it, where you put in some personal minimums about how low of an approach are you going to fly, and what kind of conditions you're going to fly. And then as you gain experience, and even then, even once you have experience, what's your level of proficiency on any given day, you may need to be prepared to adjust your personal minimums depending on how proficient you feel that day. Because sometimes if you've been out flying a lot and you've done a bunch of approaches lately, you're feeling super sharp, but 3 months from now, you may still technically be legal from a proficiency standpoint, but you may not feel all that proficient. So you may impose upon yourself some personal minimums on that day that you wouldn't at a time when maybe you had been flying a lot. So definitely, I want to point out one other thing too. You're talking about ATC and that sort of thing. The other thing that flying IFR does, all the airspace goes away.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to worry about military operation areas. You don't have to worry about restricted areas and prohibited areas and Class B and Class C and all that sort of thing, because ATC is going to take care of that for you. They're either going to route you around airspace that you shouldn't be in, or they're going to let you through it because they're tracking you. You've got a squawk code. They know who you are. They know where you're going. They got a flight plan and all that sort of thing. So in a lot of places in complex airspace, even though it's a VFR, a nice, beautiful day, I'll file IFR just because it makes it a lot simpler.
I don't have to worry about all those pesky MOAs and stuff like that.
Right.
Hey, can you talk about the safer at night too? Because I know that there's a lot of people talk about that. Like, well, why do I need or not need, but why would that make me safer at night?
So
there's one incident in particular that would describe that, but go ahead.
Let me tell you a story really quick.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm an instrument instructor, and I was out actually doing when I was instructing full time in Arizona, and we were out in the south of Phoenix, over the desert, over this one VOR doing holds. And so I was looking outside, watching for traffic, and my student was under the hood. We turned outbound away from Phoenix, where all the city lights were, and as we turned outbound, there was this road that it just kind of did that thing where it's that angle across the horizon, and instantly I was disoriented. I was like, holy cow, I could not believe how fast it happened. And it was the false horizon illusion, right? My training though, as an instrument pilot and as an instructor, I immediately went over and just had to, because I felt like we were turning. I didn't know which way was up, and I looked over and I just got locked onto the instruments, and so the instrument training kicked in. So how does it keep you safer at night? It'll help you because disorientation can happen at night, especially over not well lit areas. The weather can creep up on you at night because you may not be able to see, the briefing might have said no clouds or, clouds high enough, but you could accidentally get into those. And not to mention the fact that I was just reading this, in fact, this morning, or it was yesterday, talking about how you can use your instrument, use the knowledge of instrument procedures to, when you're flying at night, to avoid obstacles. So fly along those routes, you won't hit anything if you follow the procedures. So in all those cases, it will make night flying safer for you by following instrument training and procedures. What do you think, Tom? Same for you?
I agree. I've had a similar incident. So I was taken off one time at night from Venice, Florida, and took off out toward the water, out toward the Gulf, and got out over the water. And all of a sudden there was no horizon, no nothing. I was VFR, but I didn't have an instrument rating. And so same thing, I immediately went back to the instruments and was able to maintain orientation and I was making a turn anyhow, get back toward land where there were lots of lights, and then it became easy. But for a minute there, it was really very confusing without any horizon. The other thing is you can use an instrument approach at night into, say, an unfamiliar airport or even a familiar one, and it gives you a lot of guidance that otherwise wouldn't be available to you, both vertical and lateral guidance to keep you safe, because it's easy to, there are a lot of optical illusions that can occur at night when you're flying visually, and you can be disoriented pretty quickly sometimes flying at night on an approach, where if you're flying an actual instrument procedure, it's going to keep you safe.
And I agree. And in fact, that's something, even for the VFR pilots out there, you can work with an instructor to have them teach you how to do that part at night, just how to use instrument charts and the procedures. Not to say that you should then be flying instruments, but you can use it to help you avoid obstacles. So good. All right. Anything else, Pablo, before we go to the next one?
No, that's good. That was the night thing. I was talking about the incident with obviously the famous incident with JFK Jr., which was also one of those night. You can learn a lot from these things. You know what I mean? The night flying, especially with no moon, or over Ohio at any point at night.
Over Ohio anytime, right? So the requirements, just for that, just so you know, that you have to have at least your private pilot certificate, so no instrument rating for sport or rec, but you have to have at least a private, and then English proficient and done, of course, a written test and a check ride like many of the others. All right, let's talk about some of these other add-ons. The one theme that I will mention here for all of these is that none of these, believe it or not, require a check ride. So there's no check ride for any of this. There's no written test. They all do require flight training, and except for the tailwheel, they require ground training as well. So it's basically just train with the CFI till you get proficient. They will then sign you off and say you're good to go. Yes, Pablo?
So,
Yes.
and this is, I was waiting for the proper moment. So there's people that have been asking questions or making statements, and you know, we get a lot of either students or people that haven't been flying, obviously, that don't get rusty part. And I think this is a good time to make this distinction, which is people are saying tailwheel certifications, tailwheel, you know, tickets, you know, stuff like that, and it's like. Right. And so I think this is good. We'll have to, as we go on, just keep making those differences, which is right here, these are add-ons or endorsements that don't require a check ride,
right,
which is the big difference here, right? So you can get your tail wheel without the check ride. You can get, and so on and so forth. So I think just as we go, if we can just remember to make those distinctions, because there are people that are asking that, and it's like, no, it's not a cert. It's, you know, it's because of this. So, and I love it. That's why these people are awesome. You know, they keep us to the point. So I love that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so maybe as a quick review of that question, just the big overview, the pilot certificates are certificates. So you have your private, rec, sport, and then commercial are all certificates. The instrument actually is a rating, even though it gets on your pilot certificate, but it's instrument rating. And so is the ATP is actually a rating as well.
On top. Multi-engine as well.
Yeah, and multi-engine as well as rating. So, all right. So how about, I did my tailwheel. Tom, do you have your tailwheel endorsement, or have you done some tailwheel flying?
Well, interestingly, there is a loophole that many people won't qualify for, but I did. If you have logged tailwheel time prior to some date in 1994, I think it was, you're not required to have an endorsement. So, and I had logged tailwheel time prior to whatever that date was in 1994. So I don't have an endorsement and don't need one. But obviously, anybody learning to fly today, that doesn't apply. But any older members who perhaps are watching this, who happen to have logged some time in the past, just recognize that, you know, technically you're good to go, except obviously from a proficiency standpoint.
And it's April 15th, 91.
91. Okay,
Yeah.
so even back further than I thought.
No, I think Tom was trying to pad the old age thing. I'm teasing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I didn't know that at the top, man. I just went and looked it up. It's the only reason I.
Okay. Yeah, good point. Anyhow, but so I've been checked out in a number of tailwheel airplanes over the years, but I have not really flown. I've never felt like I mastered tailwheel flying because I just don't get to do it often enough. Don't have access to an airplane most of the time where I can stay proficient at it. So I love flying tailwheel airplanes, but I always fly with somebody else who is way more qualified than I am.
And that's probably about where I'm. I did get my tailwheel endorsement back in, I don't know, it was while I was out in Arizona. And even when I signed me off for it, he's like, oh, you're good to go. I didn't feel like I knew what the heck I was doing because they were squirrely. But it was fun. I got to fly in a super decathlon, and that was a lot of fun flying that airplane. So very, very cool. Well, so that's one you can do. It's kind of neat. You can, especially landing on grass, flying a Cub or something like that. You might really enjoy that. Or flying tow for gliders, just letting you know that. That's also tailwheel. But how about high performance? Tom, this is something I know that you've got both high performance and complex, that you've got a ton of time in the Bonanza. So tell us a little bit more about your experiences there.
Yeah, I got my complex sign off on a Cessna 172 RG way back.
I did too.
So that was, I guess that must be a common one to be used for that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's, again, sort of both of those are sort of open the door to a lot of opportunities of flying a lot of different airplanes that otherwise, you know, you kind of hit a glass ceiling if you don't have those. If, you know, somebody comes along and offers you the chance to fly a 182 RG or something like that, or a Bonanza, you're not going to be able to do that and log the time until you get these endorsements. So if you find yourself an opportunity to go fly with somebody in an airplane that fits either of these criteria, and they happen to be a CFI, make sure you get the endorsement, because it's good forever once you got it. And then when other opportunities come along to fly airplanes like that again, you'll be ready to go.
Cool. And in fact, I know I was remiss in just, it's on the slide, but we'll define it really quick. High performance means an airplane that has more than, notice that's more than 200 horsepower, so 201 or and a half and more. So things like a Cessna 182 or a Bonanza. And then the complex are the ones that have a retractable gear, flaps, controllable pitch, And that can ones where you might say, well, what if I'm using one that's got the FADEC, like the Diamond Twin Star, I believe, has the FADEC where it's the computer controls the prop and everything else. That counts as well as complex. So when you've got those requirements, that's your complex airplane. You do need sign-offs. There's one I didn't put on here because I don't know that either of us have it. Maybe you do, the high altitude endorsement as well. If you want to go fly, well, you do. Tom's got it. So tell us about that. Did you do the hyperbaric chamber or anything, or how did that go?
No, I did it in a creaky old Citation 500, built way back when, like during the Nixon administration. And anyhow, there was a company out in Wisconsin that was offering the high altitude endorsements, which is where you have to go to altitude. I think it's above 25,000 feet. And you then have to do just a short series of maneuvers, I think it's a couple of steep turns, a couple of emergency descents, that sort of thing, don the oxygen mask, and just demonstrate that you can do all those things, and you just get a logbook endorsement. But again, opens a lot of doors, because then if opportunity comes along for you to fly a turboprop or a jet with somebody, you can do it, and you can actually log the time in some of those airplanes at least. And if the person's a CFI, obviously, then you can log as an instruction time
Very
as well.
cool. Yeah, I haven't done that one yet. So, well, that'd be fun. And then there's the hyperbaric chamber. I know that actually I was just out in Oklahoma this past summer with the teacher high school workshop, and the teachers were in the hyperbaric chamber. So, which is fun because you get to pass out or something. I guess you at least get hypoxia.
Yeah, pretty safe with the nap.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, Pablo lives in Colorado now, where they live in hypoxia, right? Or
oh gosh, listen, I was unpacking the truck, 3 steps in. Give me a second. Yeah, I didn't pass out though, so that's good.
That's good. He's going to be stronger for it though. Now, let's talk about landing on H2O. I know, Tom, you've done both of these things. You've been lucky enough to do the seaplane rating, which does require a check ride. And it's like, just look at the appendix of the Airman Certification Standards or the PTS, depending on what certificate you're adding on. And then there's the ski plane, which doesn't require check rides. So, Tom, tell us a little bit more about your experiences with both the seaplane and ski plane, oddly enough.
Yeah, well, they're both super fun. Seaplane, obviously, because it has some requirements around it from a check ride standpoint and a regulatory standpoint. There are some things you have to do and have to be able to demonstrate, but you can do it in a weekend. There are lots of schools around, particularly in Florida and some in the upper Midwest, where you can go in and literally in a weekend. When I did mine in Florida, I did it with a small company. Jack Brown is the big one everybody knows down there, and they're great. But I did it with a smaller company. And I think by the time I actually was done with the check ride, I had 5 hours. Maybe it's when I went to the check ride I had 5 hours, but regardless, 5-6 hours is all it takes. So you do that, over 2 days of a weekend, and you're done. And it's really a lot of fun. It also is really educational. You learn a lot about aerodynamics and how the airplane flies. You got all this extra drag to deal with. Things to think about is, once the engine is running, you're moving. So be prepared, because you've
no brakes, right?
There's no brakes. You've untied the airplane, you start the engine, and it's moving. So you need to be aware of your surroundings. You need to be thinking a lot about what's happening around you regarding boats and jet skis and swimmers and all that sort of thing. And you can't stop. So it's just, a lot to think about, a lot to consider. And then there's docking procedures. Again, something we don't have to think about. But the other cool thing is that in a lot of areas, you never have to land in a crosswind. If you can find a lake or a river or whatever that, where you can find the right direction, you can always land into the wind, which is kind of neat. That's fun. Like down in Florida, you can land on the canals and land on lakes. Florida is great because you can hop from one lake to another, just like hopping over a tree line, and land on the next lake and the next lake. And then obviously that's true up in Alaska and Minnesota and Wisconsin. A lot of places are very seaplane friendly. Seaplane Pilots Organization is really helpful. They can tell you what bodies of water you're allowed to land on. Anyhow, it's really a lot of fun, a lot of procedures about, reading the water. And actually, I guess that's probably one of the things that really carries over to even flying land planes, is the ability to pay attention to what's happening with the wind. I'm much more in tune, I guess, with the wind now, because when I'm flying over any kind of body of water, I'm looking at what the water surface is, and I can judge what direction the wind's coming from, and also the speed, because those are all the kind of things that are super important when you're flying a seaplane. So you look at, the water is really calm along the shore, and then out of ways you see some ripples and that sort of thing, where the wind's coming across the trees or whatever, and not affecting this water close to shore because it's still, but out here a ways, you see the ripple effect where the wind's coming from that direction. So just neat stuff like that you learn along the way.
How close do you have to be? Do you have to do a pass, like a low pass, to get a view of the water, or what altitude can you actually see the differences between the ripples or direction to get a good idea?
I mean, surprisingly high, you can tell where the wind direction, because again, the difference between that really calm water next to the shore and the mottled surface. You can get at least sense where the wind is coming from. And then if you want to really see how high the waves are and what sort of surface you got, then you do have to get lower. But usually there's not a lot of obstacles to deal with, certainly when you're right over the water. And so you can get down fairly low. And in a seaplane, from a regulatory standpoint, you have a lot more latitude about altitudes that you're permitted to fly, because you are often, doing that, looking for places to land and clearing it for obstacles and that sort of thing. So you have a lot more latitude in flying lower without getting in trouble. And lots of things like glassy water landings, for example, it's very hard to tell how high you are above the water from a landing standpoint if the water is super smooth. You really prefer water that has a little bit of texture to, a little bit of wind to kind of stir up the water to give you some depth perception, because if it's glassy, you have no depth perception, and it's easy to basically crash the airplane into the water.
Wow.
Because you don't realize how close you are to it. So there's a technique for flying, it's called the point of last visual reference, where you pick a point over near the edge of the water, like some reeds or maybe a shrub, that sort of thing, and you come in over that, and you and you're set up for landing pretty much, got your power set, you're configured, and you come over that point right at the shore, and that's your last point of visual reference. So from there on out, you don't know how high you are above the water, except you've gauged it by that tree or shrub or whatever. And then you pitch up and set up about a 500 foot per minute descent, and you have to know the power settings and all the configurations going to give you that. And then you just sit back and hold that. You don't look outside and try to gauge what it is. You just let the airplane settle down onto the water, because if you try to gauge it on a glassy water situation, you're probably going to end up either flaring too high and dropping into the water, or crashing into the water because you don't realize that you're that close to it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So real quick though, one thing you did mention was you get more latitude or altitude from the FAA, about where you can fly in altitude and stuff. But how does the ski plane work though? Because I did hear about the FAA coming down on somebody who was checking out a landing place and he got too low, and this was on ski planes.
Yeah.
And so it was like, the argument was he coming in for a landing, or was he just flying low where he shouldn't have been, because there were some houses. It was like a residential area.
Right.
Residential area. I think there's 3 houses, in a mile. And so there's something like that. So are there any kind of, like, first of all, have you heard of that? And is it different than the seaplane?
Well, I've heard of it. Yeah, I'm aware of the case that you're referring to. Okay. And again, it's like a lot of things regarding altitude. It's somewhat of a judgment call, and what sort of corroborating sort of information do you have to demonstrate that you weren't being reckless, and that you were in fact looking for a place to land. When you're out over the water, typically you're not bothering anybody unless you upset some boater. Over land in somebody's house, kind of a different story, and it's a little tougher to defend, I would say there.
Yeah. And it's on video.
Yeah.
That was the other thing. Like,
right. Well, even then, so it's hard to gauge altitude sometimes from.
It is absolutely. Okay. Yeah. Sorry for that. I just remembered it.
No, but that's a great segue, because seaplane flying is a great summertime activity. It's super fun, and you can go to places that you can't go in any other means of transportation. That's true, like out in the West, in some of the wilderness areas. You can land on some of the rivers out there, and pull up on a gravel bar, something like that. And oftentimes there's no other way except maybe by boat to get in and out of these places, and you don't leave any tracks. You're not damaged anything, and so it's a lot of fun. But guess what happens in the wintertime? The water hardens, and so you have a hard water problem, as the ski plane pilots like to say. But they see it as an opportunity because they're swapping out the main gear in some cases for skis, or if they've got hydraulic skis like you've got in the picture there, they're strapping skis on the wheels, and then you have the choice of landing on skis, or you can hydraulically or manually raise the skis up, and the tires then protrude down through the skis, and you can land on hard surfaces, including ice. So if you have a ski plane with hydraulic skis, you can put skis down, land on the snow or ice, or if you want, you can actually land on wheels on ice, which of course we know there's some ice runways around that people land on with just regular wheel airplanes. But ski plane flying is super fun. You really do, if you land on snow, it's really a soft, gentle landing. But there are a lot of things to be aware of there too. I mean, wind obviously can blow powdery snow around, and you can get disoriented pretty quickly if you get into a whiteout situation. And just like a glassy water landing, if the snow surface is really smooth, you have no depth perception. And there's some cool tricks that pilots use. They'll take with them, they'll cut some like short boughs of pine limbs, and they'll carry them with them in the airplane. And if they want to land in some field somewhere where they don't have any depth perception, they'll fly over and drop them off kind of in a row a little bit. And then when they come back around for a landing, that's enough. Seeing that little patch of green out there is enough to give you some depth perception, so you know how close you are to the surface. It's pretty neat.
With that cool tip, you literally just made it worth having you here. Thank you. That was fantastic.
Okay, I'm out of here. See you.
That's good. So just to go back, so we've got the seaplane. Obviously, there's a check ride involved in that because you are adding.
Right.
So most people are getting airplane single engine land added onto their airplane certificate, their pilot certificate. You're adding the sea on. But for the ski plane, you told us there's not an endorsement or anything. It's theoretically, because legally you could just go out and fly it. But as you said, there's probably a better way to go about this, which is to get some training. Yeah,
absolutely.
And
I think, I don't think we actually mentioned, I don't remember actually if it's in the slides, but I think another one like that is mountain flying. I could get in a plane right now and fly over the mountains.
Yeah, you can.
I'm not going to.
Thank you.
But yes.
Good idea.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things, right? It just comes down to that PIC stuff.
We discussed yesterday. We're probably going to do an episode on mountain flying in the future coming up. We're going to get somebody to come on and talk about that. So that'll be a good one.
I'll find a local person. So write me if you're local and have your mountain or know somebody.
Yes. Hit me. Yes, there are experienced mountain pilots or instructors out there. Let us know if you want to be on the show. Okay. So here's one of the things you can do too, rated for adventure. And trust me, there are some adventures involved here, is you can become an instructor. Of course, the requirements are right there. You can be a flight instructor or a ground instructor. And the reason I say adventurous, because I can tell you from experience that I never learned more about flying than when I started instructing, especially landing. Trying to teach somebody to land and help them get it, and especially watching the person over and over again, doing landings and everything else. I learned a ton from that. And so it's very rewarding, and it can be adventurous too, because I know CFIs will often make the joke of, who's going to try to hurt me today, and it's keeping the airplane safe. So it's like you will definitely become more of a master of the airplane, and just learning and understanding how it works and how to get people to do it. So for the flight instructor, obviously there's some training and a check ride involved. You got 2 knowledge tests you have to take. One is for the subject area, whatever one that instructor rating you're going for, and then the FOI, which I wrote down below on the one for ground instructor, is the fundamentals of instruction. You got to be 18 years old, English proficient, and then you have to have a commercial pilot certificate with the appropriate rating. And for the ground instructor, for those that might be interested in that, you can do a basic, advanced, or instrument ground instructor rating. Again, a written test on whatever the subject area is, and the fundamentals of instruction. The thing that I wanted to mention here was that for both of them, for the fundamentals of instruction, that if you are a certificated teacher, you don't have to take that test. You only have 1 test to take, the written test. For the ground instructor, no check ride, literally 1 or 2 written tests, depending on your qualifications. Typically, most people are 2 written tests. You take it to the FAA and you're done. you get your certificate. So, and then you can go start teaching people at least the ground
How to
knowledge.
fly.
No, you can teach them how to prepare for the written test.
Look, I thought it was a
Anyway.
loophole.
So anyway, I would definitely recommend if it's something you're interested in. It's a good bit of work to get it, but it's worth it. You will learn a ton from doing it.
And particularly needed right now as we're looking at the pilot shortage and that sort of thing. And flight schools are dying for mechanics and for flight instructors. And so if you have any thoughts of this and you feel like giving back to the pilot community, this is a great way to do it because it's real need right now. And you also have a lot of flexibility from a schedule standpoint. You know, you can do this, get hired by a flight school, and you can teach full time, but you can also do this on the side, weekends or after work, before work. Great way to make a little extra cash and also help people really get, have an amazing experience in their flight training journey.
Yeah, you get to go beyond like even flying for free. You can get paid to go fly with someone, so that's really cool too. Or you can, some people will donate their time as well. But yeah, get paid to go fly. It is fun. You said it's very flexible. So check it out. If you thought about it, that's something to consider. It's worthwhile. Trust me, you'll learn a ton from that. All right, now this is one that I know Pablo and Tom have tons of experience doing this. GA for travel. I just put up a few points here of no TSA lines, no baggage fees, no long drives from the airport. You can make your own schedule. But so Tom, want to start us off with just, I know you've done a lot of travel in your Bonanza and stuff. Tell us a little more about how you used it, how you used airplanes for traveling around.
Yeah, I mean, I really have. I've flown GA airplanes in 48 states. Somehow I've missed South Dakota, and then Hawaii. I've been to all 50, but I've only flown GA in 48. And I've flown GA airplanes on, I think, 5 continents. So it is pretty amazing what you can do with a light GA airplane. I mean, I've literally flown around the world as part of an air race back in 1992. And flown in, like I said, a lot of countries, but been to Europe and Africa and Australia, New Zealand, and a bunch of other places, and flown GA airplanes. And it's amazing that you can take this skill and it's transportable. You can go anywhere in the world. And while some of the regulations may be a little bit different, the airplanes are probably going to be the same. With usually with a couple of flights with a local person, you can take this skill and use it pretty much anywhere in the world. But as far as flying domestically, I've used GA airplanes for work. If you follow AOPA Pilot Magazine and our video channels and that sort of thing, I've flown myself for assignments, and usually with a photographer and or a videographer on board, loaded floor to ceiling with gear. And the cool thing about our A36 Bonanzas that we have, AOPA has one too, is that you can take those double doors off the back, and you've got your photographer and or videographer with her and all your gear. Take those doors off, and you can launch on a air-to-air photo mission using the Bonanza as your photo platform. And then once we're done, we land, put all the gear back in, put the doors back on, and go home. So we're sort of all self-contained. But I have flown, like I said, cross country all these decades, and it's been fascinating to see the technology changes that have been really helpful in making it a lot easier and safer to fly cross country, with GPS obviously being right at the top of the list. But terrain awareness, flying in parts of the world maybe you're not or country you're not familiar with, but you got terrain warning systems that we didn't have back in the day. We thought Storm Scope was the coolest thing in the world back in the 90s, and now it's embedded in the whether in cockpit, whether we get either off a satellite or off of ADS-B, we get all that NexRad, that sort of thing. I mean, in fact, in the dark ages, we'd call Flight Watch, which doesn't even exist anymore, and talk to some dude who's looking at a radar screen, kind of has a general sense of where you are. He's going, you might be able to get through there. Now we've got it right in front of us, and we know, it's for strategic purposes, not tactical, but still you have a good sense of where the weather is around you. Really increases the utility of the airplane. And then synthetic vision for like flying approaches. It's like cheating. So again, you have this opportunity to fly long distance and arrive at your destination with a lot of situational awareness that you didn't have in the past. Typically these days we have great autopilots too to help you out, and it's just far more relaxing than it used to be. And GA airplanes, I think, really have a lot more utility because of the equipment that we have. than we did back in the day. Although I got to say, back in the day, we did get around pretty well with the equipment that we had and managed to survive. But it was a lot more stressful, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I have to say, like, just gonna say, well, Pablo, I think you're muted. Check your microphone. But I was just gonna say too that, like you said, with the synthetic vision and everything, I was gonna say too, ForeFlight as like working teaching people instruments, that's
Right.
cheating too. It shows the airplane, puts you on the plate. It's ridiculous. All right,
Yeah.
are you back, Pablo?
Yeah, it's well. I was
Okay.
going to say too is back then too. You were talking. It was a lot cheaper to fly too, but the traffic, right? To me, that's one of the most obvious
Oh,
ones. Just to be able to see other airplanes, like, are you kidding me? Now, some parts of the country still, you don't need it, right? It depends on the airspace, but for the most part, especially what my entire life, born and raised in the Chicago area, as everyone knows. I mean, there's planes everywhere. I was so close to O'Hare and Midway, and they basically almost overlap there. And so all of that, let alone the commercial ones, the little GA guys now with the ADS-B, I'm like, oh man, this is great. And sometimes you're like, where is he? You can see him here, but you don't see him, right? And you're like, I know he's here, right? You can see how high or right, they're 200 feet below you, 1,000 feet above you, or right on you. So those are all cool things too. But I was going to say something else too, and now I forgot. Yeah. So in terms of the cross country, all that's changed so much. It's the things that are coming too, I think, is pretty cool for GA travel too. I mean, I think we've all seen, even AOPA did a thing on the auto landing now that they're testing. Come on, talk about cheating. Right?
Yeah, for emergency use only at this point, but yeah. But the key to long distance cross country flying in a GA airplane is flexibility. I write a lot in the magazine over the years. I've written a lot about using an airplane, and people often say, oh my gosh, all I do is worry about the weather when I try to do that and that sort of thing. And you can take away a lot of that stress if you just pad your schedule. Be prepared whenever possible to maybe leave a day early, to launch on the trip a day early if the weather for, say, the day you're supposed to leave is looking bad. Can you leave a day early? Can you leave a day late? Same thing, coming home. Allow yourself some flexibility there. Is like, well, the weather's bad today, so I'm just not going to stress because the weather looks great tomorrow. So I've arranged my schedule at work or with the pet sitter or whatever you need to do, so that you've got some flexibility. And if you do that, you can really relieve a lot of the stress. And again, we've got such good weather tools today, forecasting tools and that sort of thing that we didn't have in the past, that really allows you to get a lot more comfortable with what's happening with the weather and what the forecasts are telling you. And so you can, use the airplane, I think, a lot more effectively than you could in the past.
And just
we got 3 minutes left, so.
Oh, yep. I was just gonna say one thing too is that we have that ability too of just you get to go to an airport close to where you're going, and you can get a rental car there or whatever. So it's tremendous. All right, special flying. I know, Tom, you wanted to share with us, and we've got about 3 minutes left, and then we'll officially end, and then we'll go to questions. But the special flying, you are going to give us some secrets because you've gotten to do some of these things with warbirds and rotorcraft and jets. How can you get into some of this really special flying? What are some of your tips for all our listeners?
Well, I mean, the warbirds, warbirds are super expensive to maintain, and oftentimes they're owned by foundations, even individuals who own them sometimes will put them into a foundation for education, because they're being used for educational purposes and that sort of thing, and they're always looking for volunteers. And if you go volunteer and help out, polishing Panchito the B-25, that's the one that I've had the most experience with. If you volunteer to help polish that, guess what? Whenever they've got seats available for somebody to fly, going to an air show or something like that, you're going to get offered those opportunities. And then, of course, once you get there, they're going to want you to help clean the belly. But if you kind of nestle up to people in the warbird community, they are very open and they're welcoming, and so you can get lots of cool opportunities to fly these things and certainly ride in them, if you just kind of show up and help out. And the same thing with rotorcraft to a certain extent. It's like hanging around the airport. As they say in life, life is 90% is showing up. And if you just hang out at the airport, you're going to run into people who have unusual aircraft of all types, who are maybe just looking to have somebody go fly with them today, or who are looking to help out and maybe give back. And so they'll offer you a seat. So that's important way to gain experience in a lot of different airplanes. And when I've flown, I know you guys too, I've flown well more than 100 models of airplanes, and a lot of it is just being kind of at the right place at the right time. And then jets, it's really fun to fly business jets. I'm typed in 2 different business jets or classes of business jets, and they're really fun to fly. Obviously, I can't afford to own one, but I've been around people who own them, and I've had the opportunity to fly them. And part of it is networking, relationships. And then, if it's something you want to do, if you have sort of the base level of experience that you would need for a jet type rating as far as the minimum number of hours and that sort of thing, you can scrape together the $15,000 or $20,000 that it requires to get a jet type rating if you want to do it on your own. But once you've done that, then you have the opportunity to maybe go make some money as a contract pilot. And so it's a great educational experience, and perhaps open some doors for you, and maybe a gateway into a career in aviation if you can get the money, out the door or up front. And sometimes even if you find the right person, they may be even willing to fund your type rating if they're looking for a pilot to fly with them occasionally. And so you can kind of open the door that way too.
That's some great tips. I didn't know that. I knew about the warbird stuff, but very cool. And I know the rotorcraft. I've heard stories about the rotorcraft people just hanging around, and they're at Frederick. We've got a guy that flies them, and I've heard they just hang out. You got to ride in one. Pablo, questions?
Oh, we got tons of questions. If we're ready to go to questions, let's finish up some of the stuff. Yeah.
Let's just do one last one here. By the way, I guess we can officially end for those folks that might need to get off. Just do that really quick. Oh, wrong way. So here is the code. Sorry, I'm jumping around like crazy, but here's the pilot passport code. This is the official end. We'll do that one last bit. We'll talk about charitable flying in just a moment before we take questions. But the official pilot code. So if you are looking for your wings credit, all you had to have done is registered for today's webinar with the email that you use for your FAA wing site, the FAAsafety.gov site. If you did not register with that email, just email us at ftinitiative@aopa.org, and we'll let you know. This is recorded. You don't need to do anything for wings credit as long as you register with that email. If, however, you want to play around with the AOPA pilot passport, there's the code. And Stephen, want to just give us a quick rundown on what that's about?
A quick rundown. So the AOPA app has a passport feature built into it. Pulls up information for different airports around the country. It's got details you can look up for traveling around, and then it's a way you can check in when you get to those locations. Lets you check in within 3 miles of the airport. It's got different badges for different zones. It does have a point system. I know our marketing folks and the people who run the app do the occasional like contests and things. So there's actually a chance to win some prizes as you do your check-ins around the country. So check it out. We have a unique badge for our presentation that you can earn for checking in on that.
Okay, and just to reiterate again, this is not wings credit. That is just for fun. It's separate from wings credit, so that's a separate deal. All right, let's just go back before we take our questions and just talk briefly about doing some charitable flying. I know that both Pablo and Tom have both done this. You probably want to start us off. Just tell us about some of your experience in doing charitable flying.
So one of the reasons I actually got my private pilot was actually to do this. Because it was one of those things, and I think we've talked about it in other webinars, which was, what am I going to do with my private pilot certificate? Well, I went the opposite way. I said, I want to do this. My wife was a huge animal lover, so I said, I want to do this. I'm going to get my private pilot license. So, and this is one of the things with Pilots and Pause there. You'll see on the fifth bullet. Great organization. It was actually a lot of people have joined, so it's become very difficult to get a flight because they'll send you the email says we need somebody, and the minute you go to it, like, oh man, somebody already got it. But that was in the Chicagoland area. I haven't tried out here yet, but it's fantastic. They give you, it's not just paws, it's chicken feet, it's turkey feet. There's one that I didn't get, and it was in the mountains actually when I was visiting, and I saw it and it came, and it was like, oh, if I only had a plane out here, and it was some kind of rare turkey that needed to be saved. So, well, I don't have a plane, but God, that would have been fun. So yeah, so Pilots and Pause is fantastic. That's the one I've done and there's a feeling you get. That's all I can say. It's a great thing to do, and I would recommend it to anybody. Pilotsandpause.org. Go for it. Tom?
Yeah, these kind of charitable flights are super rewarding. I've done some medical relief flights for people who needed to be transported, but couldn't get into an airliner, and the distance was too far to travel by land. And so I've had the opportunity to fly people for medical reasons like that. I've done some pet stuff too, not officially through one of the organizations, but I've done some pet rescue flights. And now in my retirement, this is one of the things that's on my list that I thought I would have gotten to by now, but a bunch of other stuff cropped up. But I'm going to get there, and I'll be doing more charitable flying. And again, that's one of the things I was looking forward to when I started planning retirement, was now having the time and the opportunity to use the Bonanza in ways that I haven't been able to use it while I was busy working. But and this is a great list here. Air Care Alliance is kind of an overarching organization that a lot of the other charitable organizations are a member of, so they're sort of a coordinating agency. And so you can learn a lot about charitable flying by going to the Air Care Alliance website. And then, as you can see, the bottom bullet point there too, AOP has a guide to charitable flying that is really helpful to help you understand what you can and can't do from a legal standpoint and from a financial standpoint.
So one of the things real quick, I know we're over time, but this was pretty cool, and I think probably the most rewarding one. I don't think I've ever told anybody this. When I was still in Chicago, this was probably 8 years ago. There was a woman I had met. I don't even remember how I met her, but she was a triple donor, or not a donor, an organ failure person that needed to have 3 organs. And it was like, wow. And so, she was obviously having issues, couldn't get around much, basically in the hospital. And so she needed to be flown to Cleveland. And so I looked it up, and it was Cleveland Burke, Lakefront. And I don't have an instrument rating. And so it was kind of like, oh yeah, I'll do it. I don't have a plane. So right. The whole thing was going to be really difficult if I got a phone call in the middle of the night. Like, how am I going to get, I could go to my flight club, but what am I going to do in an Archer? Do you have 4 hours to? No, she was like, we have to get there. Right. So I actually had a friend who was a CFI, obviously double I, all this stuff, had access, was working for somebody who had access to a Cirrus. The owner also had a jet. And so I actually partnered with them to actually help me. And so I became the contact. And so at any point, I always had my phone with me. And so when she called, because when she would get the call, I'd make the call to my CFI friend if I needed the Cirrus, or if it was later, bad weather or something, and we just had to get there quicker because we never knew, we would use this jet. And they both agreed to partner with me. And so I was deploying for it. And it was fantastic. We did 3 flights. The first 2 got canceled after we landed at Burke. The third one was the real one, and there's police waiting there. There was an ambulance.
Wow.
The last one was in a jet, and it was like, talk about. I mean, I wasn't even flying the jet. I'm not a jet guy, right? But I helped. I was in the, you know what I mean? And when we landed, man, to see the ambulance pull up I'm getting it right now. There's like goosebumps. You're like, I actually made a difference. And so, and to me, those are the things, and that's actually the first time I was told that story. Saving a pet, it's the same thing, different, but you just get this feeling that's really insurmountable to me. And the triple transplant was really, I'm still friends with the woman. I mean, that's all I can tell you. It was 8 years ago, and she constantly brings it up. So it really is fulfilling. I know I'm taking time for this, but I had to share that. I just remembered it when we were talking. It is like no other time. I don't know if you've had feelings like this or if you've done anything like that, but to save a person's life.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the family of the young woman that I flew still reaches out to me. They still comment, when I see them, same thing.
Yeah.
So it is very rewarding.
Yeah. So anyway, sorry to bring it down like that, but I felt good.
Well, no, it's the whole reason you do that kind of stuff, right? So that's amazing. Both the stories are awesome. All right, so there's lots and there's so many of these organizations. So just check them out. AOP has got great. And the one thing I wanted to say before we take questions is that for all of these topics, AOP has got lots of resources. We've got links to just all the different types of pilot certificates, recreational, the ratings. So just all you do is search. The easiest way that I do it is I go to Google and put AOPA and then the topic, and we have lots of information about this. So please go check that out. All right, let's take questions, Pablo. And there's your pilot passport code again.
Yeah, just one more time. All right, so sorry I've taken 9 minutes here. Okay, so What would be the best way to economically regain proficiency for a private pilot who's been out for a while? We could call them rusty, I guess, for about 10 years, online courses, ground school, simulator, etc.
Well, first I would point them towards a little something called the Rusty Pilots program.
Right.
So check it out at AOPA, Rusty Pilots or rustypilots.org. I think you can get to it, and that'll get as a good way to get you started. And then I would say, and you can guys can both chime in too, I would say that definitely if you're willing to use the simulator, that's a super affordable way to get some training back in and start to get the rust out and then go fly in the airplane. But the one thing I was rusty for a while, for about 10 years in between flying professionally and then getting back in when I started working at AOPA. And the one thing I'll say to you is that when you get back in the cockpit, it's like being home again. Like the regs and remembering weather minimums and that kind of stuff, that goes away very quickly, but I still know how to fly an airplane. So be patient with yourself and go find a good CFI.
Yeah, I think you're right. People will be surprised at how quickly the flying skills come back. And then there's that old regulatory stuff and that sort of thing. And you can brush up on that with the Rusty Pilots course, which is really excellent. But also consider why it is that you left in the first place, and consider what can you do to mitigate that so it doesn't happen again. Sometimes there are circumstances occur that you just can't anticipate or you can't do anything about. But if it's access to an airplane, for example, maybe consider joining a flying club where you have better access to an airplane, more affordable, and that sort of thing. And AOPA has done a lot to support flying clubs. We've created, what's the number? It's something over 200 now.
Over 200.
And there's a bunch more in the AOPA network. And we have great resources online to help find a flying club. But that's a great way to connect to a community to help keep you engaged and give you access to an airplane so that you can continue to be involved and stay current and proficient.
And I'll just add on that. Sorry, hold on, Pablo. So whether it's a club or anything, or those organizations, those are the biggest thing we found is getting involved with other pilots. That will keep you active.
Yeah.
Real quick, can you put up next month? Someone reminded us that we usually do that, and I forgot.
Oh.
Don't forget us, guys. Next month is a good one.
Yes.
I'm looking for people to tell. Sorry. This is the next one. Sorry. Hopefully you didn't leave, but September 15th. It's a Thursday as always. 12 to 1 Eastern. We still do Eastern.
We're going to change the Zulu. We're going to change the Zulu.
Yeah, it's 10 to 11 Mountain Time. Aiming, look at the capitals here, aiming to decode the alpha, that's soup, navigating the FAA's resources. So we're going to be talking, there's AIMS, there's the FAR AIM, right? There's the Pilot's Handbook, there's the Airplane Flying Handbook. What's the difference? I don't know. We'll figure it out. All right, back to it. Sorry.
Somehow trying to make it fun, yes. All right.
All right, so here's another one. Once obtained the ground instructor cert, do I need to take the FOI test again for CFI? Does the FOI expire?
So to start with, yes, the tests expire. So when you go to take any of these tests, you've typically got 24 calendar months to use it, and then it'll go away. But the cool thing is that once you get one of your instructor ratings, and so in fact, that's what I did when I was working towards my flight instructor rating. Now, admittedly, I was a school teacher, so I didn't have to do the FOI test. But as I was taking these tests, the first thing I did as soon as I was allowed was went and got the ground instructor. So I got my ground instructor before I got my CFI, just because it was just a test. Once you get the ground instructor or a flight instructor or whatever it may be, any other instructor ratings, all you've got to do now is do whether there's a check ride or just the test for an advanced ground instructor or something like that. You just take the test. So the FOI, once you've used it and you got it on an instructor certificate, you're good to go. You don't have to worry about taking that again.
All right, here's another one. Jets require type rating. Why? Is it because they're jets or because of gross weight?
Tom, do you want to take this one?
I like the way it was asked. Beautifully done.
Well, technically, as I recall, anything over 12,500 pounds was originally the point where a type rating was required, whether it was a jet or whether it was a propeller-driven airplane. And then a lot of companies began applying for waivers on that. A lot of the early citations. Well, that I guess I've crossed over to single pilot now, and over 12.5 required a type rating, and they were typically two-pilot airplanes. So there's a lot of exceptions to the two-pilot airplane thing. But then a number of years ago, when like the Eclipse, for example, was being developed, it was going to be only like 6,000 pounds, so well less than 12.5, and it was a jet, a twin jet at that, flying at flight level 410, And it could be that people can fly that without a type rating, and in other words, without really type specific training, which is what a type rating is. And so the regulations changed to require that any turbofan or turbojet aircraft does require a type rating these days. So, and some turboprops do too, depending on how heavy they are. So I think the King Air 350, 360, for example, is one that requires a type rating. So, and 2 pilots. So there are a lot of nuances in that. So you really need to kind of dig into the regs, or call 800 USA AOPA.
Look at that.
And talk to the folks in the call center, because they know all this stuff like crazy. So they're super good.
So the number, like they'll tell you 61.83.
Not only will they tell you the reg number, they'll then explain it to you in English that you can understand.
Yeah, absolutely right. Okay. I don't even know if we know this, but I'll ask it because Tom asked. High performance, complex, and high altitude endorsements, are they also grandfathered like the tailwheel?
I don't know about the high altitude, but in fact, I've got the reg right up here.
Oh my goodness.
90% sure off the top of my head that the answer is yes, but let's go look. For the complex, yes, 97 was the one for that, and I imagine it's the same for high performance. Looking at 97, so 97 for the complex. So if you had logged PIC time in a high performance or complex before August 4th, 97, you are grandfathered in.
Look at you. How did you get that one?
Google is your friend.
Exactly.
That's right.
I have, oddly enough, my FAR AIM app over here on my iPad, and that's what I was using to, I happen to have that reg open earlier. I was looking at something.
Look at that. All right, now this one I think is based on something I said earlier about just clarifying endorsements and stuff like that. But if you get your instrument, I'll read it as it is. If you get your instrument rating with a PPL and then get a commercial certificate, does that carry on, or do you have to do an IPC or another check ride to keep your instrument rating on the new certificate? Oof, that was a long one.
So the answer to that is yes, it carries over. So if you have your instrument rating, in fact, to get your commercial, you really want to have your instrument rating. Otherwise, they put a limitation on you on your commercial certificate. So you want to get that instrument rating. That's why people typically do it. Plus, you can use that time to build towards the hours you need for your commercial anyway. So it carries over. And no, you don't need to do an IPC unless you've gotten out of currency or something like that. Except if you're going to do a multi-engine airplane. If you do a multi-engine commercial add-on, now you have to fly approaches as part of that single engine. So that's but a lot of folks aren't really doing that.
What's did you say multi-engine? What's that?
I did say multi.
How close does VFR flight following? Oh, I forgot to warn us about the flight following.
Flight following.
Flight following. All right, long-time listener, first-time caller.
Never fail.
That's how close does VFR flight following get you to the ATC protections that IFR provides?
Close but no cigar. You know,
Yes.
you can't rely on it. You know, when the flight following is advisory only, right? So the controller is as they have time, they will work with you for flight following, but there's no guarantee that they're going to keep you out of airspace. For example, you're still on your own to navigate and avoid airspace in coordination with ATC when you're doing flight following, as opposed to IFR flying. When you're into a flight plan, just all goes away.
I think the big word there is protections. Flight following doesn't protect you from anything. I mean, like you said, meaning in the sense of it's a courtesy, right? Just like you said. So if there's an airplane coming, it's nice. They might tell you, hey, you know, you got a plane coming at you, you know, 12 o'clock, right? 500 feet, whatever. I mean, I've flown so many cross countries with just flight following that I think the only one that's ever let me in without asking is Pittsburgh's Class B, right? They'll just say, hey, clear for Pittsburgh Bravo. I'm like, oh, I didn't even ask. That's cool. But for the most part, right, that's never going to happen, at least from my feelings, right? And even altitudes. You know, I've gotten everything. It's all right. I'm climbing to, you know, 9.5, coming back to Frederick, and they're like, well, you don't have to tell us that. And I tell them, all right, I don't do anything. I go to 7.5, and they say, why did you tell us? So there's a lot of things, right? And like you said, I think it really comes down to how busy they are and what space you're in. But yeah, I don't think it offers you protections in the sense of regulatory.
No regulatory, but super helpful. So very much
Correct.
recommended. Yeah.
Super
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, and from a
Super
safety standpoint, you know, they
Yes.
can offer a lot of advisories and that sort of thing, traffic
Absolutely.
and terrain and airspace and all that sort of thing, but
Yeah.
they may not.
Yeah, but they may
Even
not.
navigation. They'll do navigation for you if you get all out of sorts. I've had it happen. There's a story I tell when I teach rusty pilots, and it was about when I was doing my first cross country as a private, and they literally vectored me around the pattern of this airport that I could not see up at Harrisburg, capital city. It's a funny story. Yeah.
I will tell you this: they will tell you when you bust Bravo. Heard from a friend. Just saying,
Okay.
they will tell you that.
Yes, they will.
Tell you. That's a
Asking
guarantee.
for a friend.
All right, 10 minutes. I'll try to make these so many. If I don't get to everybody, like I always tell you, I'm so sorry. It's not because your question wasn't any good. It's just they're coming in from everywhere. If you already have your glider rating, do you, in effect, also have a tailwheel endorsement? I thought that was a good one to add here.
That's a good question, and the answer is no. So, because the glider, oddly enough, does not operate the way that a tailwheel does, because it's only got one wheel in the middle, and really that's the only one you really pay attention to. So even though it's got that little wheel in the back, you don't notice that when you're landing in a glider. So that does not count as a tailwheel. It's a totally different thing. And really, I think the major issue with the tailwheel is the motor that causes the issue, because it makes it squirrely and all the torque and everything, and then that wheel, the thing wanting to swing around on you and stuff. Well, gliders don't do that. They're easier to land.
Okay, and for the interest of the other flight following questions, I will say that there's a lot there, so we can't answer them all. But we'll talk about that later. I'm not ignoring.
We need to do an episode on flight following again.
I think we do.
That's what it's coming down to. Yeah.
I think we do. We'll do it for the Christmas review. Okay. So and this is on your original grandfather 1991 tailwheel, Tom. Someone says, is that logged tailwheel time or logged solo tailwheel time?
I think I'm pretty sure that logged instruction time, it doesn't have to be solo. Logged instruction time would qualify, I would think.
I just looked it up. It's under 6131 subparagraph I. That's where you want to look, 6131I, and it's PIC time. So you have to have logged PIC time in a tailwheel. And all of these sort of high performance complex tailwheel, all those have to log PIC, and then your grandfather.
Right, but not solo. I mean, because you can be PIC and still have somebody else in the airplane.
That is correct. You don't have to do solo. It doesn't mention that.
Did I understand you correctly that you cannot log your time in a high performance airplane until you receive the high performance endorsement?
I don't. Do you know the answer to this one, Tom? This is a PIC one for me.
Yeah, this is
well, I would think. I mean, you could, if you're flying with a CFI, in a complex airplane, that could be logged as instruction time. So you could log.
And still manipulate the controls. You could probably log it under that.
Right, but you couldn't log it as well. I was gonna say you can't log it as PIC time, but you just said you could.
Yeah, I don't want to misspeak on this. What I can tell you though is that on AOPA's website, there's two options. On AOPA's website, we have an article on logging PIC that covers all these things. And then without me having to go and research it on the time here, call 1-800-USA-AOPA, our pilot information center. Those guys will know that because I know they get asked that question a lot. I know there's an article on our website about it too, that'll get into some of those aspects.
And so based on that, I'm going to say that, we were talking about a lot of these ratings and things, and there's some really specific regulatory questions that are being asked that I'm not even going to ask, and it's not out of disrespect for the question, but I think mostly it's because call our PIC line, which, Tom, what's the number on that line?
That would be 800 USA AOPA.
God, you could read my emails, and I would just sit there all day and listen. Seriously. Okay. Have PPL and IFR. If I get a seaplane rating in an LSA, does that also count for flying a seaplane in larger aircraft? I know I said about regulatory, but I figured this is pretty good because I asked if this was an icon, and it was.
Yeah, because you already got a private pilot certificate, so you're just flying a light sport aircraft, an amphibian or a float amphibian or a light sport aircraft. So I wouldn't see why you couldn't then fly a 172, for example, on floats if you got your seaplane rating in a light sport airplane, if you have a private pilot certificate or better.
I think that the key here would come down to, and this is where I'm not absolutely sure, but I do know that for like the light sport, you can get added on things with proficiency checks, right? It's like if you're a light sport pilot, you can then add on other ratings for other things, and it doesn't require a check ride. You literally do some training, you get an endorsement from, there's another instructor you fly with, and they say, yeah, you're good to go, and then the original instructor gives you an endorsement in your logbook. But to fly on your private pilot certificate using the seaplane, you'd have to take a check ride and get it added onto your certificate. So I guess it would depend on how you did the training. If you did the check ride in a light sport seaplane, but got that added onto your pilot certificate, then I would agree with Tom, you're good to go. If you did it that proficiency check way on the light sport side, then I would say no, it doesn't apply.
I would agree.
Yeah.
Okay. That number was okay.
Yeah, it's 1-800 USA AOPA.
I lost you there for a second. Okay. Do your type ratings, like jets, et cetera, also carry on when you get a new certificate?
Yes.
Yes. So if you get a type rating as a private pilot, which I did, and then you later get a commercial certificate, assuming that it's appropriate commercial single or multi, right? Then yes, you would have commercial privileges in that jet, assuming that you meet the qualifications of the type rating at the time. In other words, you have your annual type ratings basically have to be renewed every year. So if you current as and you got your commercial certificate, yeah, you can exercise commercial privileges.
Now just be careful of category and class there, because you could have a private, say in single, but a commercial in multi, so then it may not. So just be careful there with that stuff. Yeah, because there are people that can have, because you can have like an ATP that's multi, but you're only a commercial for single, that sort of thing. So
all right,
there's weird
now
stuff
this
like
one
that.
I think this one is based on a weather knowledge type thing. And so this is, what is your recommendation around GA for travel with regards to weather? Cross countries would require more weather knowledge and could behave different than in your local area. So personally, I'd like to say, I don't know if it requires, I don't think it does, because I've done a lot of cross country. I don't think it requires more weather knowledge. I think it just requires current weather knowledge. And when you're flying this cross country, in my case, I had the privilege of flying from Frederick to DuPage Airport a lot, which was cool. That's a lot of hours, right? But it kept me, just by flying it, I kept current. You know what I mean? Because I was always, and it was always alone. 90% of the time I was alone. So there's nothing else to do but talk to yourself, right? So I start quizzing myself on the type of cloud, or I'm looking at, the what is it, the megahertz, whatever. We talked to decibels, right, on the weather to see, oh, look at that cloud over there, or look at this storm, because I had to stop a couple times because of the weather. And so, all that stuff, I guess, just becomes more so built into your thoughts as you're doing the cross, at least for me. I don't know if you two have something different there, but I don't know if it requires more knowledge. You know what I mean? You should have a certain amount of knowledge when you're flying anyway. But I think it's really in the preparation. Yes, things can pop up, but the preparation for the cross country is really what kept me flying. Thoughts?
Yeah, well, certainly there are localized weather patterns that it would be helpful to know if you're flying into that area that you haven't flown into before. I mean, like mountains, for example. If you're an east coaster and you're flying into a mountain area, and the weather patterns can be quite different there. So it would behoove you to bone up on whether in that area through a variety of sources. You might call a flight school in that area. You might call a pilot that There's a couple of books out there. Tom Horn, one of our editors, wrote a book years ago on Flying America. It's called Flying America's Weather. I think it's still available through ASA. And he looked at different regions of the country and talked about the weather patterns and what it's like to fly in those areas. So there are resources out there to help you understand what's happening in a particular area, and that might be useful to you if you're planning to fly in that area and it's different than from where you normally fly.
Cool. Oh gosh, it's hard picking these. There's so many. They're coming in fast and furious. Okay. Do you need a complex endorsement to fly an amphibious Cub with fixed pitch?
Well, complex would be And in fact, there's the thing on I didn't do the seaplane thing when I was looking at the complex. I saw it in there. But if it's fixed pitch, for a complex, it's got to be controllable pitch propeller and retractable gear. Obviously, that may not be the case on a seaplane, and then the flaps. So without the controllable pitch propeller, then you're not a complex airplane. So if it's a fixed pitch, then it's not complex.
Okay. On that note, I am sorry to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can't count them all. The 50 questions that are remaining. Again, it wasn't personal. Please know that. And I thank you, all the regulars that we have as well. We'll try to answer them as we go in future editions. But Chris, can you put up the next one again, please, for next month?
Yes, here we go. Right there.
Just to remind everybody, next episode is Thursday, September 15th, 2022 at 10 o'clock Mountain Time. Aiming to decode the alphabet soup, navigating the FAA's resources. So that'll be a good one. It'll be fun, or at least we'll try to make it fun. Gosh, only knows. But more importantly, Tom, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. We know it was a lot of effort. I mean, we had practice sessions and time.
Oh
so
my
really
gosh, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
It was great fun, guys. Thanks for putting on a great program and all the education and knowledge you guys pass on, and the engagement you provide to pilots at all levels. It's been fun.
Thank you. Chris, play us out, would you?
If you could, I don't know if we'll hear it or not. We'll try.
Whatever. So okay. So all right. So just remember next month, September 15th, and then after that we'll have for the we have an Ask the Mechanic coming up after that. So we'll be sending out for questions. So if you have those, maybe start sending them in. So thank you to all. Stephen, get us out of here.
All right.
Thank you.